Welcome. My name is Glenn Muse, and I'm going to take you on a little tour right now. And there are many connections since I started to investigate St. Alphonsus Church in Low Point and its origins. I made a couple of remarkable discoveries along the way, as leading up to its construction and the history surrounding it. And if you bear with me, you wait till the story's over, maybe you'll understand what I'm talking about. What you see in front of you is a map of what used to be Acadie, Acadia. And I have some very distinct connections that have relations to St. Alphonsus and to Lingan, and people that know where Lingan is in Cape Breton. It's a very beautiful spot until they put that big power plant there, but that's another story. But what you see here is land. In 1755 there were a couple of 100,000 Acadians, and Acadians were a distinct culture. They started out coming over from France, a couple of bad trips, and finally in 1616, this guy, my direct relative, Philip Muse, he worked for a guy named D'Entremont, and had a contract, so he had to take on his name. But when he got here, he married in with the Indians and the Micmac, and from there came the Muse family, which he lived to be about 90. He had about 16 he had mostly sons, and they spread out throughout Acadia. Philippe Muse, he was a brilliant mind because he understood the dike system. He came here under contract because the French at the time had a contract. The contract was with the nobles in the court, and he came over under contract for Champlain and his crew, and he established in Bear River, Nova Scotia, Annapolis Valley, and all of the Acadian settlements from there stem from this guy. That brings us up to Louisbourg in 1712. Louisbourg would have looked like this. And in order for Louisbourg to survive, it was a garrison, so that meant you didn't go anywhere. There was nowhere to go. And all along the coast there were small villages that were French, and there were Acadian settlements. And in particular was one settlement called Lingan. There was only one in 1713, 1712. There was only one guy there, and he said the fish and the oysters is just salmon. You wouldn't believe it. So next thing you know, we had people moving to Lingan, and by let's see, somewhere about 1745 or so, Louisbourg fell for the first time, and then the Acadians that were on the outlying areas, and they were all along the coast, there were hundreds of them, a pocket remained in Lingan, and ones that didn't get shipped back to France, there were about 25 families that stayed in Lingan, and they played the game of, they were actually captured. The British would like you to believe that they were attacked by a marauding group of Frenchmen from the mainland. Well, that's not what happened. They were actually rescued in 1848, and they were taken up to Shetty Camp in that area. That would have included the Boudreaux, the Leblanc, Doucet, Aucoin, all these names. They came from Lingan. They took off around the other side, and things pretty well settled down for quite a while. After that, there was a great expulsion of the Acadians in 1755, and they gave up the goods there and moved on to other places. And the Muses went back into Shetty Camp in Marguerite. But I have family that came in 1812. There was a settlement, an Irish settlement that sprung up in Lingan. This is what Lingan would have looked like back in about 1748 upward, minus the modern boat there. But it was a beautiful spot. There was no power plant, and it provided the fish and the lumber. There was a channel. There were settlements all in and around Lingan Bay. There was Lappin's Cove Beach. There was a place to land where the Capeland came in every year. There was farmland all through that area, and the Irish now took possession in 1812. There was a land grant in 1842 all along the coast. The Irish were settling in, or coming in from the potato famine up to the 1850s. Meanwhile, the British were fighting wars overseas. There was all kinds of crap going on over there. They were expending on this and that, and they never left the garrison in Sydney except to come out and to get tribute, you know. They had to come out in form, and they had to contend with the rebels. There were a lot of them then. But the things settled down. 1755, people were pretty well, or 1855, people were pretty well subdued. And the Acadian heartbreak was over. People were scattered. There were countless lives destroyed. But now we're into 1855, and the British have got a lock on all the coal leases in the area now. They got the ground, and they're starting to make the first mine in Lingan, and so they build up Sydney, and Sydney mines, and that's a crucial time, 1753, because then you have the Irish potato famine, and you have a lot of Irish people coming to Sydney and Sydney mines, and that's where Father Macaulay, and we'll get to him later, but Sydney was being built up, and Sydney mines, they had a tremendous amount of money poured in. They built the Sydney mines, steel and coal over there. I don't know the official name, but they built the largest steel plant. By the turn of the century, Sydney mines was an industrial hub. They had the first telephone system. They had the first railroad. They had the Montrose steel plant before Sydney had their steel plant, and then they stretched out and took over all the coal leases in the area, and that brings us to Low Point, because Low Point and Sydney mines are hooked up just across the water. You can see each beach from each side, and it used to be a critical point in the people that lived in Low Point, which we'll get to in the next segment. But right now, the Irish that came settled over in Sydney mines, and from that we had a gentleman by the name of Alphonsus George Macaulay. He was born in 1853. He was born in Sydney mines, and he used to look across the way over to Low Point, and people would go back and forth depending on the seasons and weather conditions. They had small inland sailboats with 2 masts, and they could get back and forth as they wished. There was lots of cranberries in the fall over in Cranberry Head and the beach over there, and then there was always the barter and trade between the Irish groups that were along the coast. There were Jessams and Livingstons and Lings, and there were Camerons and Petries, and you name it. There were all up and down that coastline, and the British still had the toehold in Sydney, and the Irish were getting a little uppity because the mines were coming in and land was being taken on them out there, and the church burnt down mysteriously. And so did the one in Lingan. And Lingan in 1818, the little church of St. Joseph that was there, we had the honor of having St. Vincent de Paul, and a lot of people have heard of St. Vincent de Paul because of his good works and saintliness, of his piety, and today there are organizations that bear his name because of that, and that's one of the connections that we have to Lingan, because Lingan was part of his parish. Lingan and Waterford at St. Agnes, And New Waterford wasn't born yet. It wasn't even a town. It was still Barrashwa. Then we had Low Point, Kilkenny Lake, and South Bar. And all those names changed. They all changed during the coal industrial revolution in the late 1800s, and they were changed to after the Queen, Victoria, New Victoria, Victoria Mines, and Sydney Mines, and Sydney, all these royal names. And the Irish were all sent amok again, and this time they stood up to the coal company, said they were going to build a church that reflected them and it wouldn't be burnt again. And that's when George Macaulay comes into the picture. This is the old Sydney collieries. Big coal had moved into the area, and it'll be a little. I'm going to take you on a little trip in the next little segment of this as to how it fit in to St. Alphonsus and the church in Low Point, because the expansion of the industrial base in the area were pushing everything out into the harbor, out towards Low Point. They needed that area out there, and my grandfather, stubborn as he could be, built right on Low Point and would not move. And he stayed on that Low Point. That house was there until 1975, I think. And anyway, Joe Ling, my grandfather, worked with Alphonse's father, George Macaulay, to build the stone church, and it opened in 1916. And they built that stone by stone, and it was still a mystery as to how it burnt down.